Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at theDove.us. Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Delighted, as always, to have just a little bit of this man's time because he is one busy guy. He and his dad, they are perhaps the best legal watchdog team on Capitol Hill and in America. And I'm talking about Jordan Sekulow, who is the Executive Director of American Center for Law and Justice. And we have a lot to talk to him about today. How you doing, Jordan? Good to see you, friend.
I'm good, Perry. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, I don't know when you guys sleep, but hopefully you can catch a few here and there.
We try a little bit.
All right. Now, explain to us this lawsuit between the legislative branch and the executive branch. How does this work?
Sure. This is it's unique, certainly, Perry, and there's always issues, one of standing when it comes to specific members of Congress. There's been a lot of commentators who have pointed out and said, well, the courts have looked, pretty wary on individual members of Congress standing. But this is not the case here. This is the House of Representatives, led by the Speaker, of course, John Boehner, but the entire House of Representatives bringing a lawsuit challenging President Obama's executive use of executive authority or executive power, specifically in regards to the employer mandate inside the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. That's been delayed twice since the law's passage, not by Congress. The law is clear. It was supposed to go into effect in 2013, January 1st of 2013, and it didn't. And that was done. The reason why it didn't was because President Obama said it wouldn't. And so there was no congressional legislation amending the timing of the law. So that's where this challenge is focusing on.
Can it work?
You know, it's novel. This is not an area, so it's not a law that was written with a lot of executive discretion. So there are some laws that may not have the timing specifically laid out, and a president could say, okay, now we're going to start, or we need to do this before it applies to this group, and that could be argued. But in this case, because the law was so clear, I think that Congress does have a real argument in court. And so obviously courts are always a little bit nervous about getting involved in the power struggle between the legislative branch and the executive branch because they're the third branch of government. But that's their job, Perry, ultimately is to try and when there is an overreach, it sets a bad precedent, not just for President Obama, but for presidents in the future. Anyone who thinks that the president's gotten too powerful, the office of the president has gotten too powerful. And I would say in this case, if legislators pass a law, even a law we don't like, and it's got start dates, and then the president can say, well, okay, it'll apply to some people as the law said, but to other kinds of people in different situations, it won't apply to you for 2 more years. That gives the president a serious amount of power to amend legislation without Congress, and that's something that's not in presidential power in Article 2 of the Constitution.
All right, so if he didn't have the powers to do it, then why did why did the legislative branch yield to it? Why don't they just say, you don't have that power?
That's going to be one of the issues in court. You've got the power of the purse. You don't have to fund these efforts. You did fund these efforts. Is that, in a sense, an acquiescence to the president's decision here? And did you, in a sense, give him the latitude, if you will, to do this kind of delay in the law and kind of authority? So obviously that'll be part of the case. Now, the response back to that, of course, is when you have to decide between, as we saw, shutting down the entire government or funding laws that you feel like aren't fully being implemented correctly, or as they say, that puts Congress in a situation where obviously, again, it gives the president a lot of power because the president can blame Congress for shutting down the government, which affects people more than just that law, or gets what he wants. So the court could get into that dichotomy between when the Congress has to make this choice of shutting down government or fighting back against a president and executive branch, which is really taking a significant power grab. And ultimately, what this is really doing is long-term empowering what we like to call the fourth branch of government, which is the bureaucracy that's been created in Washington, D.C., because ultimately this decision-making power and rule-making power, it all comes through them. We saw today the draft rules for the employee mandate employer mandate are just coming out today by the IRS. I mean, so it's been years since the law passed, and they're just now getting to it.
What a mess. Let me ask you this. I mean, the bottom line here, isn't it, the House or maybe the legislative branch is trying to figure out a way to slap this president for abuse of powers, and they've selected a very narrow issue to do it on. It's pretty risky. Do you think it'll ever see the light of day in front of a judge between now and the time the president leaves office?
Well, certainly no. So this lawsuit will get filed, and we'll see. The standing issue may actually be one that has its own oral argument. So it may be a novel enough approach because it is the entire House of Representatives. If this was just a single member of Congress, we've seen those not be very successful in court because what the federal courts have said is that a single member of Congress doesn't have standing because they haven't suffered the injury. To say, the law itself not being implemented is not enough for them. Now, this is different scenario when you're talking about the House of Representatives bringing a lawsuit challenging executive power. But there is something called the political question doctrine, which this is borderline because it's not just about politics. This is about all presidential power. So it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on ultimately, because if you give this power to President Obama, then a president in the future who's a conservative would have the same kind of power to amend law without having to go through the legislative process and decide for themselves when they think it's best for laws to be enacted, even when they have a start date. So ultimately, I think we'll see some oral argument. It may be on the standing issue. And it's one of those, if it gets past the first hurdle, which is always standing, and it's on the merits in court, it's going to be a very interesting case because I think the Obama administration, if they ultimately have to argue their point of view here, will have to put on the record a extremely expansive view of how powerful they believe the executive office of the president to be.
Well, you've probably seen some of the polls. We all have seen them. Majority of Americans now feel that America's going in the wrong direction, and well over a third would like to see the president slowed down. They think that he is abusing power. Yep. So why aren't we just going ahead and going with articles of impeachment? It seems that would be more impacting than a lawsuit that won't see the light of day between now and the time he leaves office.
Well, I think there's two reasons. One, these are interpretive. So here, when we say that we think there's been an illegal reach, whether or not that amounts to high crimes and misdemeanors that the Constitution requires for impeachment is also then questionable. Now, I think the president would be in a very different situation if he had to deal with a Republican Senate. And we'll see if that's coming down the pipeline pretty soon, in the elections in November. So if people are truly upset and they really want to see things slow down and get compromised legislation to the president's desk, because that's ultimately the key here, Perry. Is one problem has been that the House has passed plenty of decent legislation, but the Senate, led by Harry Reid and the left, has been able to stop that legislation from getting to the president. So it makes it a lot easier for him to say, well, you're not getting any legislation to me. I think about the immigration issue, the border crisis issue, the health care. If Republicans take back the Senate in these upcoming elections, they can then put forward comprehensive health care reform that could replace Obamacare and put it on the president's desk. They could put comprehensive reform for border security on the president's desk. Right now, and so far in the past 6 years, we haven't seen that. So President Obama's been able to use that excuse of, well, it's just not there. That's his argument in court, is that because of the gridlock in Congress, that for things to get done, he's had to do it on his own.
Well, that's a matter of interpretation.
Yeah.
In some ways, this lawsuit is kind of covering the backside of John Boehner for allowing the president to do what he's done. He had to do something to push back, but is it too late?
Well, it's certainly, this is going to set more precedent for the future than it is now.
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately the way, when we go to court, and we're attorneys and we're a legal organization, and so it's something we do regularly, but it's a last resort, as you're talking about, and it's also the most it's the longest to get relief. So it's not like coming to an agreement or a settlement or getting legislation through even. So ultimately, this is a long, more of like the long-term fight, looking down the road. And listen, it could have an impact on President Obama in the short term, in the last couple of years of his presidency, because he's basically been operating off executive order since the Affordable Care Act was passed.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let me take a break. When we come back, Jordan, I want you to comment on this immigration issue. We had a story on our news earlier today. You perhaps have seen it. It appears now that we're going to let Hondurans in without even going through Mexico. We have a borders crisis, no question about it. And I'm wondering, is the president waiting for Congress to go on recess? And again, he'll use executive orders to do a blanket amnesty. We'll get your comments on that when we return with Jordan Sekulow, is the executive director of American Center for Law and Justice, ACLJ. Go to their website, support them. These guys do a frontline job. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and our honored guest today is Jordan Sekulow. He's the executive director of American Center for Law and Justice. And let me encourage you, go to their website. What an incredible resource, the aclj.org, and there's just so much there on all of these issues. He and his dad, Jay, do an incredible job, and support them in what they do, because they are our voice there amongst the roar on Capitol Hill. Hi, Jordan, as we were heading into the break, I wanted to get your update on what's happening on the border crises. I mean, this thing just seems to be absolutely crazy. And now we're displacing these children in cities throughout the country. I don't think there's any way we could either gather those up or anybody else and send them back. And even though that should be what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's pretty sick situation, Perry. I say sick because I really do believe this was playing politics with young children's lives. And I say that because a lot of this stems from an executive order. We were just talking about executive power issued by President Obama a couple of years ago, which opened up, it kind of was his way of reasserting the DREAM Act, which never made its way through Congress, never got to his desk, through executive order for minors, so for young people primarily, and a misinterpretation that was put through a lot of these Central American, Latin American countries that somehow anybody who's a child then can, if they come into America, they will get citizenship, which is not the law of the land, and why we're in a situation like this. He has requested $3.7 billion. Yeah. That's $1 billion from Congress to fix this problem. Now, I don't see Congress authorizing that. And the reason why is because President Obama has been unwilling to enforce existing immigration laws. He's been, again, doing a lot of work through executive order. And those on his side, Democrat members of Congress, have been extremely confident, which is something to note, that an executive order is coming here to grant some kind of legal status to all of these children that have flooded through the border. And obviously, it's a twofold crisis. It's causing troubles in states, and it's a drain on resources and how to take care. It's a compassion issue as well for all of us who are Christians, because these kids are certainly, listen, I mean, they're in very difficult situations, to say the least. But also, if we allow this kind of action to take place where the laws aren't enforced, and then someone comes to us and says, well, I need $3.7 billion now to fix it, we are playing right into the hands of, and we're basically enacting the policies that we refuse to do legislatively through that executive order process once again.
All right, so there is a law in place now that does protect the kids. They come over, we have to take care of them, and that seems to be the open door. Now, if he does some kind of a blanket amnesty executive order while Congress is in recess, do you think that could backfire come November?
It could. Certainly this will be, I think it's state to state and in a sense congressional district to congressional district. So it'll be perceived differently depending on where you are in the country. There are certain areas where this has become and it has a danger of becoming one of those issues where you could look like you lack a lot of compassion. As you said, we take care of young people. The question is, what do you do with them long term? Do you take them into the country and grant them legal status, which then opens the door for their families? I mean, that's the long-term problems here, right, to try and come in as well. Or go through the process of trying to send them home, which, as you said, I mean, could be extremely difficult. The optics there alone, not just the personal side, could be troubling to say the least. But I do think that if this crisis, if it's put into the right context, and it's not just conservatives talking to conservatives, but people understand that this was a President Obama created crisis. Mm-hmm. He refused to work with Congress on any kind of bipartisan reform when it comes to immigration. It's always been, since his beginning of his presidency, it's his way or the highway. There's nothing in between. And so what we've seen is very little get done. Since he lost that congressional majority because of the Affordable Care Act, there's been very little significant legislation that's moved through Congress.
All right. Is there some kind of a legal tug-of-war, maybe even legal crisis being set up with Governor Perry dispatching the National Guard to protect the Texan borders there on the national borders versus the federal responsibility?
Always. You know, we saw this through laws that have been challenged by the Obama administration all the way to the Supreme Court, some which survived those legal challenges, some which didn't, because ultimately, you know, the Immigration Naturalization Authority is a federal authority. It's in Article 1 of the Constitution, so it's a power given to the Congress and the federal government to enforce the laws. But there's also a question of what happens when the federal government isn't doing its job. And the Supreme Court's kind of taking this approach of, well, it's one thing to implement new and more restrictive policies. We're not going to allow that. But to train officials to take care of situations the federal government refuses to, I think is a different situation. And the border states, certainly they've got a state interest in protecting their citizens. But yes, I mean, to answer the question in a short way, yes, this could again be another legal battle between the Obama administration saying, no, you actually can't do that. Even though we're unwilling to do it, and it's our job, you can't take that authority on.
Wow. Let's see what happens. In the meantime, it'd be interesting if what Governor Perry is doing succeeds. I mean, if he actually enforces the border and stops it, hello.
Yeah. Well, you know, sure. I mean, that's going to be obviously one big part of this, that more than just the legal side, is there a way to resolve it in a sense, in a way that keeps that doesn't get out of control and also gets things back to relative. I mean, it's not like the situation of the border has been great, but back to how it was before. You know, but it's taken an issue that people on both sides have kind of dragged their feet and haven't come to any kind of solutions on. And now it's kind of pushed it right forward again and said, this is what happens when you don't update laws to stay with the times. And those laws we really do need comprehensive reform, both on border security and our immigration policies.
All right, let's switch topics for a moment. When's the last time your hard drive crashed?
You know, I can't remember the last time we couldn't recover any documents at the ACLJ. We have auditors all the time, doing our work, and then also, the IRS, and we're a C3 organization, so we have to comply with all the different governments, federal and state governments where we operate, and so
do we.
You know, this idea at the IRS, it's gotten to a point where obviously, just this week, we've now got the IRS backtracking on whether or not the emails are recoverable from Lois Lerner and about, they said, less than 20 other officials who were associated with her. So a lot of hard drives crashing. And even in federal court, they have had to issue affidavits. This is the IRS is who I'm talking about these hard drives being destroyed. And so the same week that we had affidavits issued to a federal court judge saying this is what happened, this is what we believe what happened to the hard drives, we had the deputy associate chief counsel at the IRS tell Congress that in fact that these emails may not be gone. Ultimately, I think the court case, as we're moving forward in federal court, is putting a lot of pressure on the IRS because these individuals and the agency is starting to get to the point where discovery is looming. And the IRS doesn't want to have full discovery. I mean, that would put it in a situation that's very difficult. So I think that's why we're seeing the backtracking. They may be doing what they can at this point to try and restore some of those emails. And because they know that the bigger implications are not just Lois Lerner or even a dozen more IRS officials, that it could be a real trouble, I think, once we start looking into the IRS greater communication. All
right, so you have select committee now looking at it. Do you think this could elevate to special prosecutor?
There's going to be, a hearing next week on Capitol Hill that we're taking part in on that very issue. This is how I think it happens. Change in Congress completely. So not just the House of Representatives being in conservative hands, but also the Senate. And then with those two pressure points on President Obama, it becomes, again, much more difficult for President Obama to say no because he's actually having to answer. They're going to be putting pressure from both houses of Congress. We're not there. And of course, lots can change with elections. I think that's the way that ultimately happens. And this continued information, whether it comes to our federal court cases, we represent 41 of these groups, or we're getting to the point of the next part of the case in federal court. Or the congressional investigations, is that ultimately the IRS has inappropriately answered Congress. They've inappropriately withheld information. Now it looks like they've inappropriately destroyed information. Wow. All of this is not just damaging as a brand, the IRS brand, but it can really hurt them in federal court. And so I think that's why we may start seeing some backtracking. But the IRS has played hardball with this throughout the entire process.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see after November if that heats up. And I would assume if there is a significant change turnover in Congress after November, Benghazi could elevate back into the scene, maybe even to the status of special prosecutor.
That's right. All of those issues could change, and we'd finally see how this administration works when they've got not just pressure from the House of Representatives, which they try to write off consistently because they've got the Senate, but when they've got the entire Congress breathing down their neck, and that changes things for IRS officials. It changes things for State Department officials. It changes things for the Department of Justice.
Wow. All right, so we're heading towards the election. Let's say there is a turnover in Congress, certainly in the Senate we're hoping for, but the numbers as far as Tea Party types, if I can use that, in the House increases. John Boehner's out?
I think it'd be interesting. I think he may make the decision to go after this cycle, and so we won't necessarily see a race between him and others, but I would caution, we saw what just happened it would take maybe a significant increase in those kind of members of Congress, because we saw what happened in the majority leaders race just recently on Capitol Hill, where Kevin McCarthy was able to kind of sail into victory there, and he was part of that leadership team. So I think that it may be a more significant change. That being said, the fight may not be there because Speaker Boehner may ultimately step aside at some point in those next couple of, not in the next couple of years, but the next year.
All right. In closing, Jordan, again, thank you for your time. I know a lot of people are after
Thanks,
you
Barry.
And your dad, and I value this greatly. But it appears this president is somewhat in political kamikaze mode. He's just going to do what he wants to do. I can't help but think when Congress goes into recess, we're going to see an exorbitant amount of executive orders. He could care less what people think. He's got an agenda. He seems to be going for it. And people are genuinely frustrated. Why can't we stop it?
Well, you've got to elect people who will fight for you in Washington. You got to understand that what the president's doing is somewhat unprecedented in the way he's governed. He got reelected, fairly easily, and because of that, he's taken this approach. Some have said, he kind of doesn't care. I don't think it's the case. He doesn't care. I think that it's what you said, Perry. He's got an agenda. He's got a plan. He's implementing it the way he can, and in a way, the divided Congress has set him up to be able to try and assert this executive authority. He goes around the country and says, Congress won't do it, so I will. And he's not making any secret about his strategy. And so ultimately, we got to fight him congressionally. And to do that, we'll have to put legislation on his desk that's actually, it's not just complaining, but it's also handling the problems. And
then if he vetoes it, then we know.
Then it's a real fight. You offer solutions as a Congress, which these Congresses have not done since the Affordable Care Act. There's been no significant legislation. You offer solutions, you force the president to veto it, it changes the entire debate.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back in history and you reach these impasses in other cultures, they have a tendency to swing the other way pretty quickly. Do you think that's possible in the United States? I mean, we could swing back to almost too legalistic?
It's possible. The issue I see, though, and this is why I think that the other side of the issue has done well, is that the more people who are reliant on government, it makes it more difficult for those swings to happen, even when things aren't going well. So the more people who get nervous when the subsidies are held, the federal subsidies through the health care law are held by one court to be illegal, one court to be legal, and now those cases continue. You got a lot of people who, as we said, once these laws go into effect, start getting real concerned when you want to change them around. And so the bigger we make, the larger we make this community and Americans dependent on their federal government, the less significant, the less the change is severe, I think, between the two, because people are so afraid, and then those who they elect are afraid to change things because of the impact it may have on the government benefits or services.
Wow. Jordan, thanks. Again, value greatly your time. I know you're slammed with a lot of things to do. Best to you and your dad and your whole team. You're in our prayers and thoughts, and look forward to having you back soon, my friend. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Perry.
All right. We'll be right back.